objective one is about strategic management, like what are the crop rotation strategies that we can use over the long term. Then objective two is about tactical management. What can we do this year mid-season to make some progress? Chuck did a great job covering the motivation here in terms of our yield stagnation. Basically, in Oklahoma, we have not had a statistically significant increase in statewide average grain yield since 1980 something. Large yield gaps, low nutrient use efficiency, precipitation use efficiency. We touched on that already. Our wheat systems use less than half of the rainfall we receive to grow the wheat crop. We have variable extreme weather conditions, very high year-to-year fluctuations in our crop production and farm income. I have never seen anything that will match the year-to-year fluctuation in wheat production in the Southern Great Plains. It seems, I mean, I'm sure there's some more variable ag system in the world, but I don't know what it is. So what we need is more effective tactical management approaches that can help us with mid-season input management and marketing decisions. So variety of approaches that we're pursuing here under objective two. One being, we want to get a better handle on this issue of evaporation losses, when they are, when they occur, and how large they are, and what we can do about them. So there's some basic science that's going on there, so we can better measure and model that. And then extending that, once we have some models, we really need to test them out in the field, preferably on working farms, and that's where our cropland monitoring stations come in to allow us to test and improve models for crop, water, and nitrogen use. And then those data can feed into systems, regional systems that we have to help those systems better represent the soil moisture conditions in our cropland. And I'll show you an example just to prove that they don't currently do that. And then we hopefully then with that sort of region-wide information about how much water we have available for our crops, then maybe we can make better mid-season nitrogen recommendations. We don't have nitrogen recommendations now that account for the availability of water, right? And so we need that and other ways to improve those systems. And so then ultimately it still comes down to not just how much water and nitrogen you have, what are the prices, right? We got to get into the economics of it. And so that's where we come in with some economic analysis, and I'll show you an example of that. And then ultimately all of this sort of dies on the vine if it doesn't connect with the farmers that are actually out there making the decisions. And so we're thrilled to have some of those folks that are working with us here in the room. And the goal over the project is to really help develop a network, a growing network of farmers that are addressing these challenges, because ultimately they'll solve it more so than the researchers. So I'm going to kind of walk through those 6 strategies real quickly. So number 1 is about evaporation. I can't hide. Sorry, I'd hide that, but it doesn't even show on my screen, so I can't hide it. But anyway, that says evaporation partitioning. So we can measure the total water use, that's evaporation and transpiration. And then the partitioning is to separate that out and say, okay, this much was transpiration, that helped me grow the crop. This much was evaporation, that was just lost from the soil. And I didn't get any gain from that, except, you know, maybe it cooled the soil a little bit. And so we have actually 3 different groups that are addressing this issue. And so I'm really excited about the progress they're making. The first one here, this slide is from Eduardo Santos. So wave at everybody, Eduardo. And so they are taking a couple different approaches to look at evapotranspiration partitioning. You can see there the blue bars that's a method called the underlying water use efficiency that uses the flux tower data to get at how much soil evaporation they had. They compare that with microlysimeters. That's the photo. Does anybody know where that green pointer is? That's the only one that shows up on the screen. Should be there. Yeah, I got 3 of them here, but oh wait, here's another one. I got 4. Hey, yeah, there you go. 4th one's the charm. So here's a microlysimeter buried in the soil. You got to kind of dig that up and weigh it every day to get these soil evaporation data. And you can see we're losing, you know, a substantial amount of water to evaporation. Here's one of the flux towers and a chrono station in the background. We'll talk about those in a moment. But they're also building these heat pulse sensors and use. I like how they got KSU stamped on there. That's fancy. And with these, you can actually put these little sensors very close to the soil surface and use the sensors to measure how much is being lost to evaporation. And they use a heat balance approach to do that. So that's some great work that's going on, sort of down at that micro level, and then sort of complementing that is work that's going on. Pradeep here at El Reno. I just put number 5. This is a number 5 out of a series of papers that Pradeep and his team have been publishing on water use efficiency and estimating that, again, with these eddy covariance towers. So let me just break that down so you don't know what that is. Okay, so eddy covariance means you've got this instrument. It kind of looks like a claw like this, okay? And so it's measuring 10 times per second the vertical wind speeds. We think the wind's blowing horizontally. It's actually rolling like this, okay? So wind is going up and down all the time, and it's measuring those vertical wind speeds 10 times a second. It's also measuring how much CO2 is in the air as it goes up and as it goes down, how much water vapor is in the air as it goes up and goes down. And it basically uses just a little bit of math called eddy covariance to be able to get the CO2 uptake by the crop and the water that's given off by the crop. So then you can partition that into evaporation and transpiration and look at water use efficiency. And that's some of the work that Pradeep and others are doing. And so you can see there's a lot of intricacy to this. So these lines represent different estimates of the transpiration fraction of the ET. So if it's 0.6, that means 60% of that water that was used actually went through the crop. The other 40% went just as evaporation. And so I don't want to get into the details here because I couldn't, and we'd need Pradeep to come give us a lecture. But basically, they're trying these different models and finding out which ones are going to be most effective for our cropping systems so that we get a better handle on this issue of how much is going to evaporative losses and what can we do about it. So great progress is being made there. Then Andres Patrignani, Andres, you can raise your hand. This is from his group. And so these microlysimeters that you can use to measure the evaporation are very labor intensive, and we can only get data at best once a day. And so Andres is figuring out ways to actually put sensors inside the microlysimeter so that we can get continuous data from these things out in the field. And his student, Sophia, is going to talk about that tomorrow, so you can hear more about it. But this, again, is just basic science moving forward. In addition to that, if we want to partition out how much is evaporation and how much is transpiration, well, a key factor there, what percent of your soil is covered by that green canopy? And so you can see these images just kind of really help represent that. So this is these images. There's a raw image on March 19th, and you classify the canopy cover, 25% canopy cover in that image. And they can, the old-fashioned way is to go out and use light interception measurements, and that's very labor intensive to do that. Doing it with these digital cameras and the classification is much easier to do. We can do that over time more readily. But you can see how the two curves compare. Andres or Romulo can tell you later why they diverge at the end. But I think it's because you have still standing dead. You have standing dead that's affecting the light interception, but not the green canopy cover there. I figured it out myself. Okay. All right. So there we go. So all of that feeds into ways that we would then model the evaporation. And so then we got to test those models. And so here's an example. This blue line would be a common model for evaporation, going along from March 15th to June 15th. So 3 months of data here. The instrumented microlysimeter from Andres there is the dashed green line. Okay, and then the traditional microlysimeter. Again, you just can't get as much data with the traditional microlysimeter. You get little snapshots of data, but these are new approaches that give us better estimates. And what you can see, I think, is that whether we look at the model or the microlysimeter, the evaporation gets really high sometimes. like 4, 5, 6 millimeters a day. So 6 millimeters, that's 1/4 of an inch a day of evaporation. So it can get really high in these environments. That's the challenge that we're facing. Okay, so once we have a model like that, we want to be able to test it like at the field scale, and that's where these cropland observation nodes come in, or these chronostations, as we call them. So these stations are equipped with the cosmic ray neutron detector. That's this device here. Cosmic rays are coming in from outer space all the time. And as they come in, they hit things in our atmosphere and they knock a neutron loose. If you remember your physics, your chemistry, you'll remember about neutrons. They're uncharged particles, but they're flying around at a high rate of speed. And the only thing that really slows them down, the thing that best slows them down is hydrogen. And most of the hydrogen that we have is our soil water in these environments. And so the more soil water we have, the fewer of those fast neutrons we're going to find. So this thing measures soil water without touching the soil, okay? And it's measuring soil water for that 200 or 600 foot radius around the device, all right? So that's what it's doing. And then we have a camera up here. It's like a trail camera to monitor the crop canopy. You saw those images just a moment ago. And then up on top, that's our all-in-one weather station. That helps us understand the rainfall and the local weather conditions. And so these data are from Cole's thesis. Cole, raise your hand there. So Cole, so we have 3 sites where we had one winter wheat growing season of data from these chronostations in Oklahoma. And so the blue lines, the blue dots here are the soil moisture data from the chronostation. And the red symbols, if you can see those, are where Cole or others went out and manually took soil samples around the field and measured the actual soil moisture to see is our chronostation actually telling us the real soil moisture, and it did really well. So we were within about 2%, plus or minus 2% by volume of the actual soil moisture that we measured in the field. So that seems to be working really well. But what's interesting is, we have in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma mesonet, Kansas has the Kansas mesonet. They both measure soil moisture conditions. Don't think that that represents what's happening in our winter wheat cropland. It does not. Okay, and so it typically does not. Let me qualify that a little bit. Okay, so this, I'm sorry for that bar, I'm going to take it off, but up here you can see this pink line, that's the mesonet soil moisture value. Or we can see it here at Chattanooga. Okay, so Rogers here, this is Rogers Farm. And so this pink line shows the nearest mesonet station, and you can see how much wetter it is than the winter wheat. And the primary reason for that is all those mesonet stations are typically under grass, and that grass is dormant while the wheat's growing, right? It just makes sense. And so that's why we see the winter wheat cropland being drier. The exception that we saw here, this is not typical, but actually at Bremen, the agreement was outstanding. But you'll see in a moment here, there was almost no winter wheat growth during this period at Bremen. And so I think maybe that's why we saw this good agreement. But it was really interesting. Okay. Oh, sorry, not to get too personal here, but so at Chattanooga, this is interesting. I'm from there. It's hot and dry. And so the soil moisture level started to decline in March. And right here, about April, I don't know what that date is, 14th, 15th, Cole? About April 15th, that soil moisture hit about 10% by volume. Unfortunately, the permanent wilting point for that soil, that's the point at which plants will permanently wilt and not recover, was 11%. So apparently that water stress there got bad enough, it apparently killed off that crop.
Interestingly enough, it made 18 bushels.
It made 18. Excellent. I didn't know that. So we got to add that to our manuscript, Cole. This is the canopy cover at the 3 sites. The blue is coming from the cameras, and you've seen those images, some examples. And the red are Cole or somebody else walking around in the field and sampling the green canopy cover around the field. And it did pretty well at 2 of the sites representing the canopy cover, but we were way off at Brayman. So at Brayman, again, there wasn't much growth until we got into March, but then the field as a whole had really good canopy cover up to 80%. But our particular site we monitored, we just chose a bad site, I guess, in hindsight. You didn't know that when we put it out there, but as the crop grew, it just didn't grow as well where our camera was. So that wasn't great. Cameras. So we already heard about phenocams, crop circle. I'm telling you, these things are a problem. They are really problematic. I haven't yet found an optimized camera for field monitoring. So that's something we got to tackle and do better. But interestingly, so this is that site again at Chattanooga. It hit maximum canopy. Now this site had been grazed some, okay, but it hit, but the cattle have been pulled off, and then it hit maximum canopy cover of just 50–60% about March 15th. And then it started to experience, I think, soil water stress, and it started to decline. The same thing happened up here at Chickasha. It also started to decline about March 15th, but when it got those rains in mid-April, it recovered. And you can see that secondary growth of the canopy and then the final decline as it matured. But this one, because I hypothesize, because it hit that 10% on the soil moisture, it never recovered. So if it formed that 18 bushels, it was, did that early, I suppose.
Sorry, I didn't understand. How do you measure the canopy?
So the blue line, okay, thank you. I'm not being clear. Thank you. So we have the downward facing camera that's taking 5 images a day. And every image gets transmitted by a cellular device to a computer where we process it using Andres's Canopeo algorithm to get the % green canopy cover. The red one is a student going out and walking around the field and taking photos with a device and measuring the canopy cover that way. Thank you for your question. Okay. Does that make sense now?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's like our ground truth. Yeah. Okay. So the weather observations were great. You can see, so this is interesting. The Chronos, the blue or the red dots are the Chronos data. The blue or red lines are the Mesonet data. You can't even tell them apart. And they're just exactly on top of each other for air temperature. This included that severe winter storm in February 2021, if you remember that. What's interesting to me, I want to learn more about the control on dormancy of winter wheat, and somebody in the room can tell me more about it, I'm sure. But the period of which we had no canopy growth whatsoever really well coincided with the period when we had below 0 temperatures. Okay, and we didn't see any meaningful growth at any of the sites until we stopped getting below 0 temperatures. So I thought that was interesting. I'd like to learn more about that, and somebody can maybe tell me. So some other parts of weather station were not as good. We had a little bit of, and Cole's going to show this on his poster next door, but we kind of were biased low on rainfall and solar radiation, and we were biased a little bit high on wind speed relative to the Mesonet. So that's something we need to look at a little bit more. But in general, the weather stations performed well. They have collected a ton of these data in Kansas as well. And so about, 10 or so site years of data that they've collected at different sites in Kansas, at the research station, Ashland Bottoms, and with some of our cooperating producers as well. So we're working on these, making the neutron detector, that's the most expensive part. And so we've been working with some folks on lithium foil detectors. Andres has a paper out on that already. Looking maybe at some boron line detectors that might be lower cost. Try to get the cost down of these stations. We got to have a better camera system. Evans is here, and Evans has a poster kind of looking at quality control. He looked through thousands of these images one by one and did quality control on those. And then Connor here has been working, he's our REU student, has been working on building our own camera system to have something better than what we've had before. So those posters are available next door, and we've got to improve our data delivery and visualization. Okay, so that was, I think, step number 2. Step number 3 in our methods, regional scale soil moisture mapping. So this is a mapping system that they've created there in Kansas, and we have one in Oklahoma. And you can, this just shows from June 23rd to July 23rd, the decrease in soil moisture. This is at the 2-foot depth, 60 centimeters. So when it's getting this no soil moisture down at 2 feet, you're hurting. So, but again, keep in mind, these still don't represent our winter wheat cropland. So we need to be able to incorporate better models to correct these systems. And I think Andres' student is, Joaquin is talking about that, or has a poster on that. Poster or a talk? A talk, okay, tomorrow.
Tyson, can the effect of long-term no-till influence that number as it relates to best we have one side of the county or 2 sides?
Yeah. The effect of tillage is probably more subtle and more difficult for us to capture than the effect of the difference in the vegetation. So the difference in the vegetation has a big effect, and I think we can account for it and make the Mesonet data more representative. The differences in tillage systems start to get smaller when it comes to how they affect soil moisture, or they make a difference at just specific times, key times in the season, but maybe not on average for the whole season. So it gets trickier, but we could try. We could try, but then we need a way to know which land is no-till and which one is not, and we don't yet have that either. So it's a good question. Okay, so if we knew how much soil moisture we had, then maybe we can make better nitrogen recommendations. And so the modeling group has done a lot of work on this. They're building this nitrogen recommendation tool, and it takes into account both the current conditions and looks at weather forecasts and historical weather scenarios. And they've been trying to improve the resolution of those weather forecasts. This is sort of the standard kind of resolution of a weather forecast, and they've been trying to get it down to be more detailed like these shown. And there'll be a poster on this as well. As you can see, looking at different weather generators as well. These are comparing different weather generators and finding ways to include field boundaries. That's actually really hard to do. Getting a good data set of field boundaries is really difficult. And so they're working on improving that system. But I want to show you, this is really cool if I can do it justice, and I'm about to use my 25 minutes, so I better be careful here. Okay, this is about forecasting yield before you put on your mid-season nitrogen. So if we're like in February, let's say mid-February, and we're thinking about putting on nitrogen on the winter wheat crop. Okay, so they run this model, crop model, and every sequence here represents a different weather scenario, different weather forecast for the remainder of the season. So this big spread is because we don't know how much, what the weather is going to give us for the last few months of the season, last 3 months of the season. The x-axis here is different nitrogen rates that a producer could choose to apply. Okay, so if you put on more nitrogen, you know, it tends to go up, but only to a certain limit and with a huge variance, right? Which makes Brian's job really hard in Dorivar's. So these are the yield distributions for different nitrogen rates, and the spread of the data obviously increases along with the nitrogen rate, but you have a chance of getting a higher yield. So what are you going to choose? So they have looked at this model that accounts for the CARA, which is the constant absolute risk aversion coefficient. And I think Bob Chambers is going to talk about this work tomorrow. So I'll just touch on it briefly. But basically, it's like, how risk averse are you as a farmer? What are you going to choose? And risk here just means uncertainty. So Bob can tell us more about that, but how much do you dislike uncertainty? If you dislike it a lot, then you're going to choose a pretty low nitrogen rate because you want to be certain that your investment pays off. If you're okay with uncertainty, you're risk neutral, you don't care about uncertainty, then you're going to choose this higher nitrogen rate. But it varies a lot from year to year, and we don't know it in advance. So that's the thing that they're trying to address with the modeling to account. And this accounts for uncertainty both in the weather and in the price of the wheat. And so it's pretty interesting analysis, and I think it's going to help us move forward. So that's work that's ongoing. Dayton Lambert Leisha Lambert here has also looked at this trade-off between the profit and the risk for different crop rotations. Okay, and also different tillage systems. And so if I can just give a quick summary of this, the one that had the highest profit, if you're willing to take a high risk, is the wheat soybean double crop system, right? And I don't know what site this is representing. Unfortunately, Leisha is not here, but her student Glenn and Leisha provided this analysis. And then Dayton Lambert and Shelley Hogan, both of these are represented on posters over there. They've been looking at this herbicide resistance issue. We've heard a lot about weed pressures. So they looked at different crop rotations and different tillage system. You can see some of their results here. There's more of the details on the poster that's next door, but unfortunately their group is not able to be here today. Okay, last one, number 6, the farmer to farmer network. This is in Kansas. They're building on the soil health partnership that was already in place and expanding on that in this farmer to farmer network. They used a lot of cover crop strip trials. Carlos is going to talk about those tomorrow, I think. And so they collected soil samples at the Flickner farm, Neville Brothers, and the Knopf farms. So they're making good progress there. And it's a poster for more details. In Oklahoma, we're kind of just trying to get started. We have 3 cooperators identified. 2 of them are here today. Roger Fisher and Brent Rendell are here. And we have also a demonstration site at Chickasha that's ongoing. We've been working on the chrono stations there. Brian Arnell's been doing nitrogen management comparisons there. And so we need to figure out what these next steps are going to be. For that farmer to farmer network in Oklahoma. Could be on-farm testing of the nitrogen recommendation tools. We're pretty interested, Jason Warren and others, in the soil properties that are influencing the spatial variability of the crop yield. Brian is interested in the soil properties that influence the spatial variability of the crop response to phosphorus and potassium. And ultimately, for our meeting today and tomorrow, is to get our brains together and kind of identify some shared research priorities and how to use these research and demonstration sites. So that's what we're after there. Okay, our expected outcomes, everything's going to be better. All right. Okay. Any questions?
Thanks, Tyson. Any quick questions for Tyson while? Okay, now so Jason. Questions for Tyson?